Buttermilk biscuits showed up every morning before dawn. Chitlins sparked debates that divided families for generations. Oxtail stew turned what butchers threw away into Sunday's finest meal. These 20 recipes survived the Great Depression, the Great Migration, and nearly a century of silence. Red drink. At every family reunion, church picnic, or Juneteenth celebration, you'd spot it before anyone said a word. A tall pitcher filled with something red sat on every table. Not cherry, not strawberries, just red. Symbolic weight traveled with this beverage, tracing back to West African hibiscus teas like, or zobo, bright red herbal drinks that communities used in ceremonies and gatherings. During and after slavery, families adapted those traditions into sweetened red beverages made with Kool-Aid, red soda, or fruit punches. Ingredients varied, but the color stayed sacred. Some say it symbolized the bloodshed in the fight for freedom. Others claim it represented joy, the kind you had to make for yourself when nothing else was sweet. Pineapple juice or lemon lime soda found its way into some family recipes. Others steeped hibiscus flowers or used cranberry concentrate, but every version came out cold, bright, and made to share. More than a thirst quencher, red drink served as the unofficial flag of a culture that knew how to celebrate even in struggle. Children didn't question why every gathering featured this crimson beverage. They just knew the color meant something good was happening. Elders understood the deeper meaning, even if they never spoke it aloud. Grits with cheese and butter. Before breakfast bowls became trendy, a humble pot of grits sat on nearly every black kitchen stove in the South. Cooks simmered coarse ground corn with patience and care, stirring slowly to avoid lumps, seasoning lightly with salt, and finishing with generous amounts of butter and sometimes shredded cheddar. Grits didn't cost much, but families treated them as sacred. Morning started with this taste, and guests ended their visits with a bowl at the table. Fried eggs, sausage, or just a plain serving filled you up and warmed you from the inside out. Here's something many don't know. Grits weren't just breakfast food. Dinner tables saw them too. Shrimp and grits originated as a simple fisherman's meal along the South Carolina coast. Some households poured leftover grits into pans to set overnight, then sliced and fried them crisp the next day. Nothing went to waste. Everything found a use. Children who grew up in those kitchens remember the sound of the spoon scraping the bottom of the pot as the signal that breakfast and the day had officially begun. That scraping sound meant warmth, meant routine, meant someone cared enough to wake up early and stir. Hoe cakes. Simple cornmeal pancakes at first glance, but hoe cakes carry a name and legacy that speaks volumes about Black survival, labor, and invention. Field workers, often enslaved, placed the batter on the flat side of a hoe and cooked it over an open flame. That's where the name comes from. When no stove existed, no skillet, no luxury, just grit and fire, this humble cake kept people going. Cornmeal, water, salt, and sometimes lard or bacon grease made up the economical and filling recipe. As generations moved from plantation fields to freed households, the dish stayed but evolved. Some cooks added buttermilk or eggs, making their hoe cakes fluffier and more tender. Rural southern kitchens served them alongside greens, beans, or stews, and families used them like bread to scoop up the juices. Cookbooks didn't feature them, but iron griddles did, crisping at the edges and golden in the middle every morning, served hot with butter, honey, or syrup. More than breakfast, hoe cakes stood as proof that even with the barest means, Black hands could create something warm, nourishing, and deeply rooted in tradition. Every golden disc carried the weight of that history, whether the person eating it knew the story or not. Neckbone soup. Thrift, flavor, and storytelling come together in this masterclass of a dish. White butchers once tossed neck bones aside as overlooked and undervalued cuts. Black cooks knew better. They understood that flavor lived in the bone and that the long, slow simmer of a pot could turn poverty into poetry. Regional variations shaped each recipe differently. Some families added potatoes, carrots, and celery. Others used cabbage, beans, or corn. The method stayed constant, browning the bones first, then simmering them with aromatics until the broth became rich and silky. Meat eventually pulled off the bone in soft, tender ribbons. Cooks kept spices simple: salt, pepper, garlic, maybe bay leaf, but the flavor ran deep. Many families ate this as a weekday dinner, quiet, unfussy, and deeply nourishing. Elders raised during the Great Depression or in post-war cities remembers neckbone soup as proof that making do didn't mean giving up flavor. It meant honoring every piece of the animal, every drop of labor. Some homes taught children to save the neck bones for hard times, but in truth, families made this dish whenever they needed comfort. A bad day at work, a hard conversation, a cold evening that seemed to seep into your bones. Neckbone soup answered all of it. Ham hocks and lima beans. Culinary alchemy at its finest, this dish transformed the least desirable ingredients into a pot of gold. Wealthy tables rarely featured ham hocks, the joint between the foot and leg of the pig, but African Americans, especially during the Jim Crow era, turned these discarded cuts into treasure. A smoked ham hock cooked low and slow could infuse a pot of beans with a depth of flavor that no seasoning blend could match. Indigenous and African agricultural exchange introduced lima beans to the Americas, and they became a cheap and filling staple in Black communities. Hours of simmering with ham hocks, onions, garlic, and pepper let them absorb every bit of the smoky broth. Beans softened to a creamy texture, making every bite rich and savory. Fancy this was not. Banquets never served it, but Black households, especially during the 1940s to 60s, called it a weeknight miracle that stretched leftovers into a full meal. Children often remember the rhythmic bubbling sound coming from the stove and the smell that clung to the air long after dinner ended. Leftovers tasted even better the next day, served over rice or sopped up with cornbread. To this day, some elders still say, if you know how to season beans right, you'll never go hungry. Molasses gingerbread. Before white sugar became widely available or affordable, Black families reached for molasses as the sweetener of choice, cheaper, more robust in flavor. It gave gingerbread a deep, almost smoky sweetness that white sugar never could. Suburban cookbooks featured a light, fluffy kind. This wasn't that. Dense, moist, and spiced with intention. Ginger, cloves, cinnamon, and allspice danced together in every bite. Cast iron pans or old metal trays with seasoned flavors baked into them held the batter. Families made it during fall and winter holidays, especially when guests arrived. Black coffee or buttermilk paired beautifully with it, and leftovers rarely lasted more than a day. Many elders learned this as their first dessert, handed down without a recipe card. You'll know it's right when the batter hugs the spoon, one grandmother told her granddaughter. Few people today realize just how far back this cake goes. More than dessert, it draws a direct line to a time when sweetness had to be earned and every ingredient held precious value. That depth of flavor couldn't be replicated with modern shortcuts. You had to earn it the old way. Candied yams. Never just a side dish, candied yams crowned any holiday spread with their sugary, sticky glory. Despite the name, most cooks didn't use actual yams, but sweet potatoes, a crop with deep African roots. West African ceremonial meals centered on yams, and enslaved Africans preserved that tradition in the New World using sweet potatoes instead. Thoughtfulness and indulgence shaped every preparation. Cooks layered thick rounds of sweet potato in a buttered baking dish, then drenched them in brown sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and melted butter. Some added orange juice, vanilla, or even a splash of bourbon. Baking continued not just until soft, but until the syrup thickened and caramelized at the edges. Taste alone didn't make this dish special. Timing did. Families almost always made candied yams in advance, which meant the smell teased everyone for hours before dinner. Once on the plate, they touched everything: the greens, the stuffing, the turkey, blending sweet with savory in a uniquely soulful way. Dessert they were not. Memory they were. The kind that made your plate feel full even before you took a bite, that caramelized edge piece. Grandchildren still argue over who gets it at holiday tables today. Black-eyed pea fritters, akara. Before canned beans filled grocery store shelves, African-American families soaked, peeled, and ground fresh black-eyed peas by hand. Akara emerged from that labor, also known as black-eyed pea fritters. Deep West African roots anchor this dish, particularly in Senegal, where similar fritters still sell street-side with spicy sauces and bread. Southern cooks evolved these fritters into a beloved appetizer or side, especially in coastal regions with strong Gullah influence. Blending the beans into a paste with onion, garlic, and salt, then deep frying them into crispy, golden rounds created the perfect texture. Crunchy outside, soft and airy inside. Some versions included chopped peppers or scallions. Hot sauce or tangy relish often accompanied them as dipping sauces. More than a snack, akara served as a cultural handshake between continents, a tangible reminder that African foodways endured even when names and languages fell away. Eating them today feels like time traveling with taste. One bite connects you to something older, deeper, and beautifully unbroken. The crunch speaks across centuries, carrying a message that survived the Middle Passage and found new life in American soil. Chitlins, chitterlings. Mere mention of chitlins stirs a visceral reaction in many, and that's part of their power. Pig intestines form the base of this deeply polarizing food, controversial even within Black communities. But ingenuity, resilience, and sometimes trauma hide behind that controversy, and that's why chitlins still matter. During slavery, enslaved Africans received the least desirable parts of butchered animals: feet, ears, tails, and intestines. Cleaning chitlins thoroughly took hours, then slow boiling them with vinegar, onions, garlic, and spices reduced odor and tenderized the meat. Intense and sacred, the process demanded respect. Many homes had a chitin queen, the one elder who possessed the patience and skill to prepare them correctly. For decades, chitlins graced holiday tables or special occasions, particularly in the South. Deprivation birthed this delicacy. Eating chitlins today acts as cultural continuity, an emotional breadcrumb connecting the table to the field, the present to a past that sits hard to digest but necessary to remember. Some families still serve them with pride. Others have let the tradition fade, but the story remains either way. Gullah red rice. If soul food had an anthem, Gullah red rice might serve as the heartbeat. Rich coastal cultures of South Carolina and Georgia birthed this dish, a spiritual cousin to West African jollof rice. The Gullah Geechee people, descendants of enslaved Africans who lived in relative isolation on the Sea Islands, preserved more African customs, language, and culinary tradition than almost any other Black American group. More than a side, red rice built a cultural bridge. Cooks start with long grain rice sautéed in bacon fat or oil with onions, bell peppers, garlic, and crushed tomatoes, thyme, cayenne, and sometimes celery seed bring boldness. Smoked sausage, chicken gizzards, or shrimp joined the pot when available, but even without meat, the dish delivered richness, tang, and deep satisfaction. Gullah homes often cooked red rice for Sunday dinners, birthdays, or church potlucks. The tomato base symbolized wealth and blessing. Some elders would say that if your red rice came out too dry or too mushy, you weren't paying attention, because this dish demanded care. You had to feel it. Recognition finally finds Gullah red rice in the 21st century, but truth be told, it never disappeared. It just stayed close to the heart, passed down quietly by those who never forgot where they came from. Coastal Carolina grandmothers still make it the same way their grandmothers did, measuring nothing but feeling everything. Hoppin' John. African spiritual symbolism and Southern practicality fill every spoonful of this dish. Black-eyed peas, rice, and pork, often bacon or ham hock, combine into a meal of luck, legacy, and nourishment. Senegalese and Gullah food traditions likely planted its roots, where rice and beans already served as dietary staples. In the antebellum South, enslaved Africans adapted these traditions using plantation ingredients: black-eyed peas from gardens, rice from the Carolina coast, and pork scraps from the kitchen. New Year's Day tables featured Hoppin' John for good luck, with peas symbolizing coins and greens served alongside representing paper money. But families didn't reserve it just for holidays. Everyday ingenuity drove its popularity. Rice and peas stretched to feed large families, and pork added just enough richness to keep spirits high even when pockets sat empty. Regional cooks varied their seasonings, but onion, garlic, and bay leaf appeared almost universally. Some added vinegar, hot sauce, or smoked paprika for depth. Leftovers never hit the trash. Instead, they reincarnated the next day as Skippin' Jenny, a sign of frugality which, in itself, stood as a virtue to celebrate. Wasting food meant wasting the labor that grew it, cooked it, and served it. Every grain of rice mattered. Peach cobbler. More than dessert, peach cobbler wraps you in a warm embrace from history. African-American cooks in Deep South kitchens transformed seasonal fruit and humble pantry staples into acts of love. That's where this dish begins. Summer brought fresh peaches by the bushel. From backyard trees, roadside stands, or farms where families worked, sugar held precious value. Wartime rationed flour. But somehow, enough always appeared to make cobbler. Cooks created a crust more rustic than pie, sometimes spooned over like dumplings, other times carefully rolled into golden perfection. Cinnamon, nutmeg, and a touch of lemon juice brightened the sweetness. Cast iron pans held the bubbling fruit until it caramelized around the edges. You could hear it hiss as it cooled. Hot serving came standard, often with a melting scoop of ice cream or just a splash of cold cream. But ceremony mattered most. Families made it for Sunday dinners, homecomings, repasts, and even first dates, a way of saying you are home now. Memory of that golden crust and syrupy filling lives longer than the recipe itself for many, and everyone fought for the corner piece. Always a little more crust, always claimed by the eldest at the table. Younger family members learned to arrive early if they wanted a chance at those crispy edges. Chicken and dumplings. Necessity birthed this dish, but care perfected it. In many Black households, especially during the Depression and wartime eras, a single chicken had to stretch. Chicken and dumplings answered that challenge for mothers and grandmothers across the South. First came a whole chicken boiled with onion, celery, garlic, bay leaf, and black pepper until tender. Cooks pulled meat from bones and returned it to the pot. The broth, already rich from fat and flavor, became the base for dumplings, a mix of flour, fat, usually shortening or lard, and a bit of milk or water. Rolling thin and cutting into strips or rounds, cooks added the dumplings to the pot and simmered them until soft but firm. Some families preferred slick dumplings, wide and flat. Others liked them puffed up and biscuit-like. Shape didn't matter. The result stayed the same: warm, filling, and deeply comforting. Restaurant food this was not. Grief food, cold weather food, celebration food. Food that wrapped around the soul. Eaten with a big spoon and a bigger smile, chicken and dumplings delivered on one promise: making sure everyone at the table had something hot, hearty, and made with love. That single chicken fed a family of 8, and nobody left hungry. Oxtail stew. Once dismissed as scraps, oxtails sat as the kind of cut left for the poor. Too fatty, too bony, too tough. But African-American kitchens transformed them into rich, luxurious stews that rivaled any fine dining roast. Culinary reversal in its purest form. What others threw away, Black cooks elevated into legacy. First came searing until caramelized, then slow braising in a base of onions, garlic, tomato paste, Worcestershire sauce, and broth. Allspice, thyme, bay leaves, or Scotch bonnet peppers added flavor when Caribbean influence touched the kitchen. Meat cooked for hours until it slid off the thigh. Bone and marrow melted into the sauce, thickening it with natural richness. Rice or buttered noodles cradled the stew, and weeknight tables rarely saw it. Sundays claimed this dish, a show of effort and love. When the pot hit the table, silence followed, the kind that meant reverence, not absence. Even when the world handed you bones, oxtail stew proved you could still make something unforgettable. That marrow-rich sauce told a story of patience, skill, and refusing to accept that anything given to you had to stay worthless. Fried catfish. If anything unified Black family reunions, the fish fry did, and no fish earned more love or deeper roots in African-American culinary tradition than fried catfish. Southern rivers and creeks held abundant catfish, cheap to catch and hard to overcook, making it the perfect protein for families stretching dollars while still creating something delicious. Fried catfish meant more than a meal. It meant an event. Families gathered outside with picnic tables, aluminum pans, gallon jugs of sweet tea, and tubs of cornmeal. Buttermilk marinated the fish briefly, tenderizing the flesh and cutting the muddy flavor catfish sometimes carried. Then came dredging in a seasoned cornmeal blend, usually cayenne, garlic powder, and a bit of paprika. Hot peanut oil made the fillets bubble and crisp, forming a golden shell that snapped with each bite. Crystal or Louisiana hot sauce always appeared alongside, plus a slice of white bread and maybe coleslaw or baked beans. Some cooks added lemon wedges, others a tartar sauce their auntie swore by. And leftovers, cold on white bread the next day with mustard. Survival turned into celebration with fried catfish, a taste of community wrapped in paper towels and shared by hand. Strangers became family around those outdoor fryers, and family bonds grew stronger with every crispy bite. Baked macaroni and cheese. Forget the boxed version. In Black American households, baked mac and cheese demanded artistry, often reserved for holidays, Sunday dinners, or special guests. Pasta and cheese didn't tell the whole story. Structure, richness, and love layered between elbow macaroni completed it. Cheese sauce held the key, a roux of butter and flour, slowly blended with milk infused with sharp cheddar, Colby, or even Velveeta, depending on the cook. Cooks folded the mixture with cooked macaroni, layered it in a buttered baking dish, and topped it with more cheese or breadcrumbs. Some families added eggs for firmness. Others used evaporated milk for a custard-like texture. Then came baking, no stovetop shortcuts. A creamy interior with a slightly crispy golden top defined success, and a smell that pulled people from across the house. Unspoken rules governed this dish. Only one person earned the right to make the mac and cheese at any gathering. Earning that honor took years, not assignment. And if you took the last corner piece, the one with the crispy cheese crust, you better pray another pan existed, because Auntie never stopped watching. Earning that corner piece meant you'd arrive. Losing it to a cousin, that grudge might last until next Thanksgiving. Collard greens with smoked turkey necks. Long before health blogs praised leafy greens, Black families simmered pots of collards as both sustenance and celebration. West African roots anchor this recipe, where leafy greens served essential roles in daily diets, often boiled with spices and meats. In the American South, collards became more than a side dish. Cultural staples emerged, gracing Sunday dinners, funerals, family reunions, and especially New Year's Day, when greens symbolized money and prosperity. Traditional recipes called for ham hocks, fatback, or neck bones, but health-conscious generations generations turned to smoked turkey necks, which delivered that same smoky, salty depth without excess fat. Cooks soaked and rinsed the greens several times. Any true Southern cook will tell you, grit has no place in a pot of greens. Chopping came next, then adding everything to a large stock pot filled with turkey necks, onions, garlic, red pepper flakes, vinegar, and sometimes a splash of hot sauce. Hours of simmering, not minutes, made the greens tender and dark, soaking up the broth known affectionately as pot liquor. That broth alone could nourish you. Elders sopped it up with cornbread or saved it for sipping. Collard greens delivered more than food. Medicine, memory, and tradition passed through the hands of women who remembered slavery only one generation removed. That pot liquor carried vitamins and minerals that kept families healthy through winters when doctors cost too much money to visit. Smothered pork chops. A hallmark of Southern black cooking, this dish earns its place not just for flavor, but for what it represents, turning modest ingredients into something luxurious. During the Great Migration, many black families carried with them the practice of stretching ingredients to feed large households. Pork chops counted as a treat, especially bone-in cuts bought cheaply at the butcher or bartered for at community markets. Brilliant simplicity defined the technique. First, cooks seasoned the chops with salt, black pepper, paprika, garlic powder, and maybe a pinch of cayenne. Dredged them in flour and fried until golden, then remove them while the pan still sizzled. Sliced onions went into that same skillet, sometimes green bell peppers too, deglazed with broth or water and thickened into a rich golden brown gravy. But the magic, that came in the smothering. Cooks returned the pork chops to the skillet, submerged them in gravy, and slow cooked everything on low for up to an hour. Meat fell apart tender, infused with a depth of flavor that no seasoning packet could match. White rice, cabbage, or buttery mashed potatoes completed the plate, feeding the body. But more importantly, this dish told the story of generations who turned scraps into souls. That gravy-soaked meat carried the ingenuity of cooks who refused to let limited means limit their creativity. Sweet potato pie. No Thanksgiving table in a black household reached completion without sweet potato pie, and it meant more than dessert. The matriarch's signature lived in every slice. In many families, only one person made the pie and nobody debated it. You didn't just make sweet potato pie, you inherited it. West African foodways brought sweet potatoes across the Atlantic as a staple. Unlike pumpkin pie, which dominated white American kitchens, sweet potato pie used ingredients readily available in the South and reflected African American flavor preferences. Warm, spiced, comforting. Cooks roasted the sweet potatoes, never boiled. Roasting concentrated the sugars. Mashing came next until smooth, then mixing with eggs, evaporated milk, brown sugar, vanilla, nutmeg, cinnamon, and just a hint of lemon or orange zest. Homemade or store-bought, the crust had to be buttery and flaky, no shortcuts. Newer generations sometimes topped their pies with marshmallows or pecan crumbles, but tradition called for a plain top, glossy from the egg and sugar blend. The first slice always went to the elder, and no one dared ask for seconds until everyone had a plate. More than pie, it carried praise, legacy, and love. Served cold the next morning with coffee and stories from the past. That first bite at breakfast reminded you why you came home for the holidays in the first place. Buttermilk biscuits. If sweet potato pie carried legacy and greens carried wisdom, then buttermilk biscuits carried daily grace. In African American kitchens, biscuits came together at sunrise, before school, before church, before anyone else woke. Scratch preparation ruled. No measuring cups, just hands, memory, and feel. Flour, baking powder, salt, cold lard or butter, and tangy buttermilk, folded gently but never overworked, rolled out and cut with drinking glasses, baked until golden, split open, and filled with whatever sat on hand. Jam, sausage, eggs, or just butter, soft on the inside, flaky on the outside. The bottom crisped on cast iron like it had received a kiss from fire. Gravy got mopped up with these biscuits. Leftover meat got sandwiched. A child after a bad day got comforted. Some cooks dropped them by spoon, others rolled perfect rounds. And when that biscuit tin came out, usually dented, maybe wrapped in a kitchen towel, you knew something sacred was about to appear. Truth be told, no one made them quite like Grandma. Even following her steps exactly, yours would still taste different because the secret ingredient wasn't technique. Time made the difference. Time spent in the kitchen before dawn. Time measured in generations rather than minutes. Time that turned flour and buttermilk into something that felt like home. Buttermilk biscuits showed up every single day. The one constant when everything else felt uncertain. Not a holiday dish, not a special occasion. The everyday sacred. Daily proof that no matter how hard times got, something warm, something made with love, waited at the table. More than biscuits. Daily grace, morning ritual, and the heartbeat of the Black Southern kitchen. Thanks for watching. Check out other cards on the screen.